Let's walk through an example. It is a commonly held belief that crossovers are safer than small cars. If a crossover and a small car are in a collision, does the crossover sustain less damage as suggested by the cost of repair? Consumer Reports crashed crossovers into small cars, with the crossover moving 15 miles per hour and the front of the crossover crashing into the rear of the small car. The data is normally distributed. Below are the repair costs. So in this case, we've got, let's see, a sample of seven different cars, or 7 different pairs of cars, where one was crashed into the other, and we see that there's different repair cost for each car. So let's call this column X, let's call this column Y, and then here for D we'll look at X minus Y. So before we go any further, let's go through each of these and subtract X minus Y and fill in the differences here in this column. So let's see, 1274 minus 1721. Negative 447, so here we get a negative value. 2327 minus 1434, 893. 3223 minus 850, 2373. 2058 minus 2329, negative 271. And 3095 minus 1415, 1680. 3386 minus 1470, 1916, and then 560 minus 2080, 884, 1676. Okay, now that we've got these differences here, we're going to enter this data into a list. In our calculator. I'm going to go ahead and just enter it into L1. And after I've done that, we can continue with the hypothesis test. And again, just to kind of remind you, we'll walk through all this, the normal stages, and we'll focus on using the calculator to compute this value for us. So since we can use the data in our list to calculate the hypothesis test, right, we'll just reference the list after we've entered all the data there. Now let's state our null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. For the null hypothesis, it's always going to be that the mean of the differences is 0. Now for the alternative, we have to think for a moment what it means for the difference to be positive, or what it means for the difference to be negative in this case. When we computed D, we did X minus Y, where it was the damage to the small car minus the damage to the crossover. So if the damage to the crossover is smaller than the damage to the small car, we would expect this to be a positive value when crossover has less damage. So in this case, we would expect mu d to be positive when the crossovers have less damage than the small cars. And so let's look at the calculator function that we're going to use. Remember, we're going to enter all this data into t-test. And here I'm going to have it input the list. So we went through and we entered all the data that we collected for the differences. And I entered that into L1 on my calculator. And then, of course, the frequency would be 1. Oh, and we don't want to forget our null hypothesis is 0 in this case. So for mu naught, make sure you enter 0. And for the form of the alternative hypothesis, we'll do greater than mu naught. So mu is greater than mu naught, since it's greater than 0 here. Okay, so when we enter that into our calculator, let's see what we get. For the test statistic, we get a value of 2.685. Okay, the p-value is 0.01813. And well, what does that tell us? And so when we computed the p-value, we got something around, oh, that was the test. So the p-value was something around 0.01813. The test statistic was about 2.685. So maybe something way up here. Now this is a relatively small p-value, but if you recall from a previous slide, alpha was going to be 0.01 for this particular example. It was mentioned in a previous slide. You can look back if you want to see that. But now, what does that tell us about our decision that we're going to draw from this? So the p-value was actually greater than alpha in this case. So here we actually can't reject. We're going to fail to reject the null hypothesis. Since we failed to reject the null hypothesis, our conclusion will be that there is not enough evidence to support the claim that crossovers sustain less damage. Okay, it was very close to the significance level, so maybe if we had a different sample, we would have gotten a different result here. But in this particular sample, we didn't necessarily have enough evidence to support the claim that crossovers sustain less damage, so we can't have a conclusive statement here, so no conclusion.